Today we're doing the sense organs, and specifically we're only going to look at the eye and the ear. But let's say good afternoon to all the people who have logged on and logged in, and welcome, and I hope that you will find it helpful, this session.
Yes, and we really invite you, if you have questions relating to the topic that we're discussing today, that you please ask them. We will answer them as we go along. Sometimes part of our lesson will cover your question, but please listen. If we go a little bit fast and you cannot keep up, just remember, this is for you to concentrate on our presentation, not to copy. You can go home and read through your textbook, read through your notes, ask your teacher at school. But the important thing is that you follow us today and understand what we try to explain. Good. Colin, let's get started.
Yes, so today we kick off with paper 1 content, and this is the sense organs, the eye and the ear. Now, from our environment, we are always aware of things that we can take in from our environment, the stimuli, and there are specialized cells to detect these. And in the eye, those special receptors, as we call it, are the photoreceptors, and it is situated in the retina of the eye.
Yeah, the name photoreceptor actually says what they can pick up, what they perceive from the environment, because photo is for light, receptor then, as you said, the special nerve cells. So a photoreceptor is what we find in the eye. And just for a moment, we've got many receptors in our body. We've got chemoreceptors in our nasal passages and on our tongue for taste, because it's a chemical stimulus. We've got touch receptors, pain receptors, pressure receptors in our skin and inside our bodies, and so we can continue. But today we are going to talk about the photoreceptors and how they work in the eye to give us sight, and then mechanoreceptors in the ear, and we hear and have our balance organs. So when you see these names, don't be confused. Just think of the stimulus that is involved. Right.
Right, there's no sense in talking about the retina if you don't know where it is situated. So for that, you need to know the structure of the human eye, and there we have an internal structure of the eye. Now the eye has 3 layers. On the outside, and if you can look at your one of your co-learners there, then you can see it's the white section of the eye, and that is the sclera. But in front, it becomes transparent to form the cornea. Then there is the layer in the middle, and that is the choroid. That is normally the layer that we have with all the nerves and the blood vessels, so it is also necessary for nutrients and feed the eye with nutrients.
And the choroid, the choroid contains pigment, a dark pigment that absorbs light. And the purpose of that is that light coming into the eye must fall on the retina for a clear picture, but there are no reflections inside the eye because of the choroid pigment absorbing any reflections. And that's why we can see a clear picture and not a diffused image. Now, this drawing, Colin, is extremely important for them to know. They must know it. And if you look at the choroid, what happens to the choroid in front of at the front of the eye? There it is, the ciliary body. You can see where the arrow goes with the ciliary muscle, and then the iris. There you can see the iris, which if you look in your friend's eye next to you is the color of the eye. Brown or very brown, green, blue, gray, etc.
Okay, that brings us to the very important part on the inside, and there's the most inner layer, and that is the retina of the eye. And there where the most of these photoreceptors are situated, and we're going to refer to that later on, that is the yellow spot or the fovea, as you can see it, and that is where clear images are being transferred to.
Yeah, if you look directly in front of you, that is where the image that you see is formed.
Okay, and this, of course, is the lens. And this is also a very important part that they can't actually get this. And this is the opening, because this is the bottom side and there's the other side of the iris. But between the iris, there is just an opening, and that opening is what we call the pupil.
Yeah, in other words, if you look in your friend's eye, the pupil is not something that you see, it's a hole. But why can't you see into the eye? Remember, we said that all light is reflected. No light is coming out of the eye, and we see with light. So that is why we just see this black hole. So think of the pupil as a black hole. And that's why the pupil can grow bigger and smaller, and we will explain to you later how that happens.
And then we have here the section where the optic nerves and blood vessels, they enter the eye, and that is normally the blind spot. And
there goes the nerve, leaves the eye. Yeah. What do we mean by a blind spot? There are no receptors on the blind spot. And we've often watched cricket and we see, and it's an open catch, and then suddenly the cricketer can't see the ball. It's because the image fell on his blind spot. And those of you who are getting your licenses, when you drive, you have to look over your shoulder. You can't just look in your mirror to see for traffic coming from the side, because it will fall on your blind spot. And that is important. So a little lesson here.
Yeah, a little lesson there. Okay, and just before we move on, I think it's also important that you know the lens system of the eye, and light must go through all of these so that it can give a clear image on the fovea, and that is the cornea. And then it is this front chamber here, the anterior chamber with the aqueous humor, the lens, and then the chamber at the back with the vitreous humor. Remember those four things, because that is where light is being refracted. Okay.
And refracted means breaking or bending. If we think of the cornea, it's a curved surface. Then we have the watery liquid in the front chamber or the anterior chamber, from there the name aqueous humor. Then the lens, which is elastic and absolutely, as the cornea, crystal clear. Light can go through. There's nothing stopping the light or deflecting it from its pathway. Then we have the vitreous humor, which is sort of a more jelly-like substance. The eye really is a bag filled with liquid. So think of that. We've shown you a picture that's just two-dimensional, a lengthwise section. But we're going to show you pictures now to get you the more idea of a three-dimensional picture, so that you can see when we look from the front of the eye. So here, Colin, you've got it.
Yes, I have. Because this is sometimes that learners don't understand. What they show you on that two-dimensional one is only that section of the iris. But with this three-dimensional one, can you see? It's the part that gives the color to the eye. And that opening that you see there, now you can see it's the hole in front where light needs to go through. So the pupil is only an opening. But the amount of light that enters the eye, it is controlled by the muscles within your iris. Keep that in mind. It's very important to distinguish between that. Sometimes learners mention it that the pupil, because it can become smaller and bigger, they say that the pupil controls the amount of light. It is not true.
Not true, yes.
It is the muscles in your iris that control the amount of light that will enter the eye.
And remember, the iris is the color part of your eye. By the way, Colin, I wonder if our learners know that in humans we are the only mammals, or animals for that matter, that show the white of our eyes. Go home and look at your pets and look at animals around. You see very little of the white sclera. Humans show it. Reason? Because we communicate with our eyes, and that improves the reading, so to speak, of what we see in somebody's eyes. But this picture that you just show, I hope it gives you a more three-dimensional idea of the eye.
Yeah, because if you can see the white part of the eye, that's the sclera. But you must also know that it's the outer layer of the eye. There you can see, we can't see, if we look at somebody and have the frontal view, you can't see the choroid or you can't see the retina. But if you have this cut through this eye like this, then you can see all the layers. So remember that in front, and there you can see the iris there. It's that part there.
Good. Let's go to our following slide, and this is important. Our eye is very well protected, and for starters, it's in a little bucket, almost like a bowl, the bony eye socket. Now, our eyes don't rattle around in the eye socket. It is cushioned by a layer of fat behind the eye. And when people are sick, their eyes seem to be sunken. It's because the fat is slowly being absorbed. And people who are very, very obese tend to have bigger deposits of fat at the back of the eye. The eyes tend to bulge. Not necessarily, but that's the reason why it sometimes looks like it. So the first protection is the bony socket, and then the fat that cushions the eye. What we also have is the tear gland. Now the tear gland sits over here. There we have the tear gland, and it secretes tears, and every time you blink, a little bit of fluid is wiped over your eye. We only become aware of our tears when we cry or there's something in our eye. But the tears clean our eyes, they keep our eyes moist, and they're antiseptic. We also have little oil glands on the eyelid, that is those that become infected and form stars, and they lubricate so that you don't go squeak, squeak every time you blink. And we have our eyebrows and eyelashes. Eyebrows are supposed to stop sweat from going into your eye, not very effective, we know that. And then the eyelashes, so that you can squint and keep out dust. And then very important, the cornea and the white of the eye is covered with a very sensitive membrane, the conjunctiva. I wonder if some of them has ever had pink eyes. You had conjunctivitis, an infection of this conjunctiva, which is a very sensitive layer with blood vessels that we only see when there's an infection or an injury, and many, many touch and pain receptors. It is so that you can feel when something enters your eye. So it's also protection. Right. Colin, the important part.
Yeah, I think all of the parts are important. I mean, you have now expanded and elaborated on this, which is very important, because sometimes questions are being asked, and you must remember to read up also, because there's not time to mention all of these things in the classroom.
And remember, the eye muscles too, the 6 eye muscles, 3 pairs, moving the eyeball, right, in different directions. So I must go and have a look at it. But let's get to the retina, which really is about what we're doing today, the receptors.
Right, and as we said earlier on, the photoreceptors that we will find in the retina. Now, we have 2 types. We have rods and we have cones. And there you can see that the rods, they are only stimulated in low light. Now, I wonder how many of you have maybe woken up in the night, during the night, and then you can see absolutely nothing because it's dark. Your environment is dark. And then all of a sudden you can see certain things become visible and clear, and that is because your environment is known to you, but also then the rods are being stimulated. And that is when it's stimulated in low light or poor light, and everything that you see in your room is only in black and white.
Yeah, that is, and why rods? Because it's rod-shaped, really. And you see, these receptors work on a pigment that they contain that changes. So remember, the rods, as Colin has said, only for different light intensities. So rods see in black and white, really. And you do get a very rare form of color blindness where people can only see black and white. It's because they don't have any cones, only rods. So what do the rods do? Or the cones, rather?
Right. Now, there you can see why it is called the cones. It's cone-shaped. And that, as soon as you switch on the light in your room, everything is visible and you can see bright colors and the vision is so much clearer because now the cones are being stimulated. And where do you think, where will most of these cones be situated? Of course, there where vision and clear vision is in, and that is on your yellow spot or the fovea.
I remember cones for color. So that's something that you can remember it by. Now, we're very fortunate. We have what we call binocular vision. If you go outside and you look at pigeons in the street or on a plane, you will see that they move their heads from side to side to see. We can look to the front of us and we have perfect vision because our vision overlaps the vision from the left and the right side. If we look at our picture, you can see that the two fields of vision, what you see with the left eye and with the right eye, overlaps in the middle. And that gives us binocular, in other words, with both eyes. And our brain combines these two images and it gives us a three-dimensional view. That is important. We have it, and predators have it, even predatory birds. They look to the front so that they can have binocular vision. We also call it stereoscopic vision. And the fact that we can form 3D images enables us to judge speed and distance. In other words, it makes, in predators, it makes for good hunting. You can know how far your prey is and how fast you have to run to catch it. That is the reason why people with only one eye are not allowed to fly an aeroplane. Not really. I mean, they can fly their own planes with their own lessons, but I'm talking now about in the Air Force or commercial planes, because they don't have this three-dimensional vision, and they have difficulty judging distance. Good. Now, before we get to this slide, Colin, I think just to tell our learners, there's a lot of information that we've given you so far. And lots of it is information that you can get give one word for or choose the correct answer. But when we work with the eye, there are two processes that you must know. And the one is how the eye adapts for sight from a distance. And the other one is how the eye adapts for different light intensities. So Colin is going to explain the first one now, the adaptation of the eye for distance viewing, and it's called, Colin, accommodation.
That's right. So we're looking at the functioning of the eye. But before we get that, and just to emphasize what you've said, Lorraine, it's very important that what we have done now, you can clearly see that you can expect to have, in an exam paper, you can expect to have the image or a diagram of the eye, and you must identify different parts and functions. So keep that in mind. And now we get to the second part, and that is the functioning of the eye, which is equally, if not more important to know. So you need to describe this, so make sure that you know and understand, but you must also be able to identify it from diagrams in an exam paper. Right, so let's look at what is accommodation. This is now the definition of one of the functions of the eye. And accommodation has to do with the shape of the lens. And the shape of the lens will, of course, it will become either flat or it will become rounded, which means it can adjust the shape so that there can be, or that objects that are far away or close to us can be seen clearly.
What we have here is that, and we want you at home to do the following, or in your school where you are, is to look up at the screen. That's why I'm waving to you now. Look at me, and then look at your book in front of you, and look up again and look at your book. Not too fast. You will actually feel accommodation in your eye. Now, I'm sure most of you have looked at a magnifier or a bottle, bottom of a bottle, and you've looked for a magnifier to see letters or an object get bigger or smaller. You might even have used it for a fire glass In other words, to put something to light, to let it burn. Now, in other words, what you were looking for, it was the focus point. Now, in our eyes, this is similar. Now, we don't use the focus point, but we can't very well move the lens of our eye like that. But what our lens can do is to be more bold or sort of rounded or flatter. So the lens shape has to change to do what we do with a magnifier glass, and that is accommodation. Because when we look far away or when we look distance, the focus distance differs. The science people will know what we're talking about, and you did some of it in grade 8 or 9. So yes, our normal vision is far away vision, looking up the screen or looking in the distance, and accommodation is really for close-up vision. But yes, after close-up vision, our eyes have to adapt to distant vision again.
So what you're actually saying is that we have an unaccommodated eye and an accommodated eye.
Really, yeah.
Really. So if we're first going to look at distant vision, and that means that we're going to look at objects that are 6 meters and further than 6 meters away from the eye. So let's look at those parts of the eye that really come into play and play a role during accommodation. And remember, so this is distant vision, it's an unaccommodated eye. Here you have your lens, very important. Remember, it's light rays that must go through and it must then bend and fall onto the retina. So these are the parts, and that is why I said, keep in mind what your lens system is all about and what it consists of. But here you have your ciliary muscle, you have your suspensory ligaments, and the lens is hanging in suspension between the suspensory ligaments and, of course, the lens. Now, if you look at something, whether it's far away from you, it's actually, you remember when I said you can only see clearly when there is light visible. So it is the light ray between that object and your eye, and the distance of that light ray actually that is important. So when we look at things that's far away from us, it's that light ray between that far off object and your eye. So it is not necessary for that light ray to bend inside so that it can actually have and fall onto the retina, which means that the ciliary muscle relaxes, and if the ciliary muscle relaxes, then your suspensory ligaments, they become tense and taut. And because they become tense and taut, and I always say, if you see, for instance, if you look at my hand and you look at this, the lens is suspended there, and if the ciliary muscle relaxes, then your suspensory ligaments become taut. And can you see what happens to the lens in between? It actually pulls the lens flatter. And because then the lens becomes flatter, that means that light rays are not refracted that much, and that is why the eye is unaccommodated. But what happens with near vision, Lorraine?
No, it's just the opposite. What happens with near vision is that the muscles in the ciliary body relax so that the ciliary body gets closer to the lens. The suspensory ligaments now slacken. So there's less tension on the lens. So the lens can become biconvex. In other words, rounded on both shapes, or on both sides, so that the light rays are refracted more and a clear image is formed on the retina. Can I just show them how it works in the eye? Could we have the picture here? Right. This is your cornea, this is the retina, and this is the lens. And here is somebody standing in front of you. Now, your retina, or your cornea rather, is the first surface, because the light ray will hit the surface at an angle, and the optic mediums, it's from air to liquid, is different. The ray will be bent. Then it goes through the lens, and it's bent even more. Can you see what's happening? Then we have, on the other side, the same thing happening. The cornea bends, and the lens even more. And there, that's the focus point. But here, we have the picture. Can you see why the picture is upside down? Because light was reflected from the head, and then the light ray was bent. From the feet, the light ray was bent. So we actually have an upside down smaller image on the retina. Now, if your lens is too ball-shaped, the picture will be formed here, and it will be fuzzy. If your lens is too flat, it will be formed here, and the picture will be fuzzy. So the reason why the lens has to accommodate is to make sure that the image that you see, the picture, always falls on the retina.
Right, and we'll show them what happens when there's something wrong with the eye. The second functioning of the eye is what happens when you are in a dark environment and when you are in an environment where there's a lot of light present. Now, as I've said earlier, remember, it is the iris, the muscles in your iris, that will regulate the amount of light and that enters the eye. And here you can see, because here we have a pupil that is smaller, as it's said here, it is undilated pupil, and one that's dilated, a very big pupil. So the pupil only allows light to enter the eye, but it does not control the amount of light that enters the eye. So let's look at pupillary mechanism. Very important, because in an exam paper, whenever they talk about far and near, you must know you have to identify it as accommodation. But the moment they talk to you about an environment with bright light or very dim light, you must know it is pupillary mechanism. So, and also, make sure that you know which muscles are involved with accommodation so that you don't mix it up when you get your pupillary mechanism. So, go through us with the pupillary mechanism, Lorraine.
We've got two types of muscles in the iris. Those are circular muscles and radial muscles. Now just think, if the circular muscles contract, the pupil will be smaller. But if the radial muscles contract, the pupil will be bigger. Well, what about the other type of muscle? We've got two sets of muscles here, we've said, circular and radial. They work together, but they work antagonistically. That means, as I've said, they work together, but they've got the opposite effect. When the circular muscles contract, they will make the pupil smaller. Then the radial muscles are relaxed. It's not their job then to make the pupil smaller. But if the circular muscles relax again and the radial muscles contract, then the pupil will be bigger. So radial muscles contract, pupil bigger. Circular muscles contract, pupil smaller. By the way, Colin, I have to say this. Apparently, when you like somebody, your pupils become bigger. Did you know that?
Yes. I know that.
So ladies, that's why we invite him to a candlelit dinner. So that our pupils and his can be white and he can think without even knowing it, yes, I like this girl. But that was just between us women.
So please, for 4 marks, even if they ask you bright light or dim light, or they can ask you both. But for 4 marks, it's marks that you can't afford to throw away. So, in bright light, and remember the pupil must become smaller. It's for protection of the eye so that not too much light will enter the eye and then damage the retina of the eye. And that is why you always warned, don't look into direct sunlight because you can damage the retina and you will only see one flash in your eye.
Colin, what do they have to write about? What will their answer be? And I think quite a few years ago, there was a question like this in the paper. This guy walked out of the cave. They never said what he did in the cave, but he walked out of the cave. And we know that a cave is dark, so now he's walking out of the cave into the sunlight, and he is looking what he had in his hands, he's looking up into the distance. What must their answer be? It was an essay question.
Definitely for an essay, and you must remember an essay is 20 marks, where 17 will be given to you for facts. Now, first of all, if it's in the cave is dark and it comes out into the sunlight, it's about from dim light to bright light, and that is pupillary mechanism.
Yes.
And then when he looks at the object in his hand, it's nearby vision, and he looks far away from him or to the mountain or whatever the surroundings is, and that is again accommodation. So it's both the functioning of the eye.
They combined the two mechanisms in one question.
But importantly, I think, Lorraine, is they also need to see that they will get those 3 marks, the synthesis, because first of all you had to mention what happens to the eye, what is the condition of the eye in dim light. And then came out, so then it is how it changes into bright light. And then the third thing is to write about nearby vision, and then to objects that distant vision, to objects that are far away. So remember in that sequence too, it's a sequence that will also give you a mark if you put it in that specific sequence.
There's a question here from Sibelius. They say if the iris is damaged, is there a possibility that the person will only see black and white? If the iris is damaged, you have a problem with the regulation of light into the eye. And if the eye cannot regulate the light, that is when people often have to wear sunglasses to help them. The damage to the eye that makes you unable to see is to the retina or to the nerve to the eye or the part of the brain, the occipital lobe here at the back, where we have the visual cortex. But damage to the retina will not only make you see black and white, it can actually make you blind so that you don't see anything at all. Seeing black and white or color has got to do with the different types of photoreceptors that you have. And damage to the retina will damage both. So, and it will depend on the degree of damage, of course.
Right, and here comes the one that you try to explain to them. What happens when we have visual defects? Why is it that we wear glasses? I see your glasses are lying in front of you. Mine is on my eyes here, so let's see.
You have to look a little bit further.
Yeah. So whenever we get to the one that I am, and you can talk to them about the one that you suffer from. The first one here is short-sightedness. Now, short-sightedness is where people can only see clearly those things that are near to them, near objects, but distant objects are out of focus. And the reason for that is in here you can see that the eyeball is elongated from the front to the back. It's now, because it's flatter. The eyeball is now flat, and because it's flatter, you can see it's
actually
longer.
Because it's long. It's longer, yes. Yeah. And that's really what's the problem with me. My eyeball is too big.
Okay.
For the lens.
You see, and this happens with age. Not that we say that out loud, but age, but also normally with age, but it can be also because of the elasticity of the eye.
Most of us, sorry, I have to correct you there, most of us who are short-sighted, myopic, I got my first pair of glasses when I was in grade 6, I think. So I was still young. That is usually, most babies are born myopic because their eyeballs are too big for their heads. But that is when the shape of your eye isn't right, or your lens cannot accommodate for close or for far vision. So I can only see, if I take out my contact lenses, I won't be able to recognize you. I will know it's you. So fact of the matter is then the light rays are too bent. You can also have a too curved cornea, or your retina is too far off for the shape of your eye. So what you have to do then is to get a lens that will first bend the light rays out and then in. So a concave lens, in other words. Now I'm wearing contacts, that does the job for me. But because of old age now, it's not enough anymore. So I also have to wear a pair of
actually just
glasses.
Wanted to pull your leg there about the age, but don't worry, I'm on your heels there.
Yeah.
Right.
And then
you earlier on you showed them on the whiteboard what happens when the light rays, there is the part where the light rays, where they break. But can you see, it does not reach the retina.
That's the problem.
So that light ray needs to be elongated. And that is why the concave lens will do that. And of course, depends on the percentage of curvature. That is the percentage of the thickness of that lens.
What they do these days is to shave off a bit of the cornea. so that you don't have to wear glasses. In other words, they make the cornea flatter, and that's the laser treatment for short-sightedness.
Science and technology, eh?
And then you get the next one, the long-sightedness, and that, my dear, is you.
No, it's not me. It's definitely not me, but this is the normal eye. But what happens here is that the eyeball is now shorter from the front to the back. You see, because it's higher from the top to the bottom. And that means that the lens, look there, the incoming light rays, they refract and break there. So it is long after it is past where the retina is. So what do they need? They need to give you then a convex lens to shorten the rays so that it can fall onto the, and this is me.
that I have too.
This is now old age.
Should we just go back to this?
Yes.
Now this is really what, with long-sightedness, is when your parents start, or your granny, when they start to read with a long arm. I know there's one advertisement for specs, you know, where you can go, where they say leave the long arm for the sucky dancers. But what also happens here with long-sightedness is that the lens loses its elasticity with old age, so it cannot bend the light rays enough, and that's also why it falls. With astigmatism, as you said now, I'm also astigmatic, and that is when you have an uneven surface to the cornea.
Yeah, then the cornea, instead of it being like a soccer ball, nice and rounded, it becomes actually irregularly shaped like a rugby ball. And that rugby ball shape, it causes the incoming light to refract in two ways, so that it actually, they are now, you see, conflicting messages, because there are now 2 points, focal points on the retina, and that is why the image that you look at is then blurred. And this is with age, and really.
But you also get it with disease, or with an accident. Sometimes astigmatism can be, as you say, with age, a flat area, but you can be born with an irregular cornea, and it's also called astigmatism.
So it can be either the cornea or the lens, or both of the two, that causes this type of. But for you, remember, you must know what short-sightedness, long-sightedness is, how to correct it, and also astigmatism. And then the fourth one, and the last one that we're going to look at, is cataracts. And there you can actually see it, eh? You can see there the clouding of the lens, and this is because you see your lens consists mostly of proteins, and the proteins are situated and arranged in such a way that the light can go through. But when it clots like that, and it clots, and then the lens becomes cloudy, and either the only thing that they do is they remove that lens and they will replace it with a synthetic one.
Yeah, and remember, too much sunlight can also increase your chances of getting a cataract. So wear your specs and don't look into the sun. Colin, the ear and balance.
Yeah, the ear, once again, the structure of the ear, identify different parts, and I can already tell you there are certain labels to the ear that the examiners are very fond of asking you to identify, but also then to give the functions. And there you have the pinna, and you have the auditory canal, and then you have your tympanic membrane, and then the ossicles, the 3 little ossicles there, which are the smallest bones in your whole body. And but you can go through this, but the labels that we think that we need to point out to you, we can't just say that you must only study that, but that we normally see is the pinna, the auditory canal, and then the Eustachian tube, and then the windows there. You have the oval window, and you have the round window here, this side. And then, of course, the inner ear, you have your semicircular canals, and then the cochlea. So go through those and look at those functions also. But we are going to concentrate to you on the function of the ear, and that is now the path of the sound waves. Now, if you know the structure of the ear from the inside from the outside rather, to the inside, then the pathway of that sound waves are and would be no problem to you. So please make effort at least to know that the structure of the ear from the outside to the inside, so that you can at least know the path of sound waves and get and score marks there. There's no way that you should actually throw away these marks. It's unnecessary for them not to know basic things so that they can apply it.
And before we continue, Colin's going to go through the pathway of a sound wave with us. Before we continue, remember the auditory canal on the outside of your ear is filled with air. The middle ear is filled with air, but the inner ear is filled with liquid. And that makes a difference to the transferring of the sound wave. When the sound wave hits the tympanum, the eardrum vibrates, and it causes the auditory ossicles, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, or the malleus, incus, and stapes, to vibrate as well. And those little bones increase the sound waves by 20 times. And that is what little hearing aid do for you if the bones are not, or the ligaments attaching them are not elastic anymore. So, but why I'm saying this is, remember, they can ask you what is the function of the Eustachian tube. Is to equalize pressure on both sides of the eardrum.
That is why I said they ask those labels, but know the function.
And to drain liquid from the ear if it builds up during an infection or when you have hay fever. So that's what I'm trying to say. They can ask you the role of this little structure as it relates to hearing.
And since we are talking about this, and it's also, once again, it's corrective measures. For instance, if the Eustachian tube can't perform that function, and that is where they replace it, or they insert some grommets into the ear so that it can do that function and drain the ear of
the
fluid.
Eardrum, yes.
So remember those things, but it's all about pressure, and that is why when you have, for instance, flu, there's no way that you can go and do some parachute jumping because your eardrum will burst, because the pressure on either side of your eardrum will be inconsistent. And it will burst and you will become deaf. So let's look at the path of sound waves. At least you must know this for anything between 5 to 7 marks. So pay attention. Right. First of all, if you've ever wondered why is it that some people have big ears or these lows, the pinnas, I don't know, but it has one function, and that is to trap the sound waves and then direct it into the auditory canal. So from the auditory canal, it will hit what we call the tympanic membrane that starts vibrating, and those vibrations will be amplified about, as you said, with 20 times, and it will hit against these 3 ossicles, and they will articulate with one another and amplify sound even more, and then it will hit against what we call the oval window. And the oval window, you see, this is the section, as we said now, that is filled with air. And from here, it will enter the inner ear, and here it is filled with fluid. So those vibration causes then pressure waves within the cochlea inside here. Now you see, this is rolled up. It looks like the little shell in the house of a snail. And but if it's rolled down, which it in this natural form, it looks like this. But if we should study the inside and the structure of it inside, you will see that there are 3 canals inside. And they are filled with what we call a fluid, the endolymph. And there are sensory cells within the organ of Corti, and they are stimulated. And then these nerve impulses will go via the auditory nerve to your cerebrum of the brain, and sound will be generated there.
In other words, the path of a sound wave from the outer ear to the cochlea, you should know the steps where the sound wave moves, as Colin did it with you now. Right. If we look at our next slide, that you spoke about the organ of Corti, and we find it in the cochlea. Now what happens is that we have a membrane that moves. If I could just have a picture here for 2 minutes. Could we have? Okay. That is the cochlea remember, it's a long tube, and we've cut through it now. It's a tube within a tube, really. There you've got it. So this is liquid, this is liquid, this is liquid. And we've got our organ of Corti sitting here on this basal membrane. And there go our nerve cells. And these are sensory cells. And they are attached to another membrane, the tectorial membrane, sitting there. Now sound waves come from the stirrup into this part, the scala vestibulum, and we have vibrations. Transferred to this Reissner membrane that vibrates. Transferred to the endolymph in the scala media, vibrations. Transferred to the basal membrane, vibrations. When this membrane vibrates, these cells will move up and down. But the tectorial membrane is rigid, it won't move. In other words, if I can use this without damaging it, right, can we have a look? This is what will happen. Plucking. Okay? Sorry to all the sound technicians out there. So there will be a plucking movement. And the plucks is the mechanical impulse. If the sound is very hard, it will be a big movement. Soft sound, small movements. Musical sounds, very rhythmic plucks. And noises, lots of random plucks. And it all happens in this organ of Corti. Colin, won't you compare my drawing with the organ of Corti for them?
There you can see is the bottom one, the
basal membrane,
the basilar membrane. There you can see is the tectorial membrane that's almost like a veranda over the cells.
That's a good one.
And then you can see there are the hair cells, and these are the receptors in the ear. And they are the ones that move when these membranes move, and the one that doesn't move is this one, the tectorial membrane. And you can see each and every hair cell has a little fiber, a nerve fiber attached to it, and it will form bigger nerve fibers that eventually will form the auditory nerve. And those are the names that you also need to know. Right, when we get to balance, there are only a few. The terminology here is very important because you will hear, they will talk about the vestibular apparatus, and it consists of the utricle, the saccule, and the 3 semicircular canals, which we will show you now, just so that you know. Then the otoliths, those are crystals, little crystals that is in a jelly-like medium of calcium carbonate, and they are very sensitive and they sense gravity and movement of the head. Then the macula, the otoliths, they are situated within the macula because the macula as a whole detects the position of the head in space in respect to the gravity. And because you can always, if you look at us now and I must bend forward, and I ask myself, why is it that my head doesn't fall down to the ground? Because the macula here comes into play. And then we have the cristals, and they are receptors within our semicircular canal, and they detect changes in the speed or movement of the head. And the cristals, they are situated within. It's a widened part at the bottom of a semicircular canal that contain these crista. You see one crista, many cristae, and that is called the ampulla. And then inside is the cupula, which is the jelly-like capsule. Now, I know I ran through it because we have like 2-3 minutes left.
Yeah, but a good thing you tell them that they must learn these terms because it's difficult words and they can be asked to explain. And there you can see, Colin, and if you can show, here at the bottom is a crista.
Yeah, if you can see there's a widened part of a semicircular canal, that's the ampulla, and inside the ampulla you get the cupula, you see?
And if you move your head, you can, if you move your head from side to side, the endolymph, the liquid that you said, will flow.
And that is why
it will stimulate the crista to move, and that will be picked up by the nerves.
Okay, we'll show you now, but you can see here that you have 3 semicircular canals. Each one is in a different angle, and no, we don't go back, and we get to balance. So we have 2 types of receptors that are involved with balance. It's the macula and the cristas. Right, now first of all, the macula you will find in these sac-like structures here, in the utricle and the saccule. I think they also talk about utriculus and the sacculus.
That's the more Latinized form,
So they all or they provide information of the position of the head in space. For instance, if you stand up straight, you see the otoliths. They all are in this jelly-like substance, and they are the hair cells which are the receptors once again. So when you stand up straight, there's an even pressure on these hair cells, and that doesn't matter. But the moment you bend forward, this jelly-like substance with the otoliths, they are displaced, and they send these messages with these fibers and of course to the muscles in your skull and to your, first of all, to the cerebellum and the cerebrum to get displacement, but the cerebellum then also for balancing.
Yeah, remember cerebellum for balance and cerebrum for the awareness. So if you just think, and I think most of you have had the sensation that you spin around, and then when you come to a standstill, it feels as if you're still spinning. It's those calcium carbonate little crystals, marble crystals that you have in your head that's still spinning and that has to settle. So what does your balance organ, your vestibular apparatus pick up? The position of your head in relation to the ground, the movement of your head in relation to the ground. You have to know the two structures, the semicircular canal with the ampullae in which we find the crystals, and the utricle and the saccule in which we find the macula or the maculae. And I think that's just about what they have to know.
Yes, it is. But also, please make sure that, for instance, if you look at this one, and if, for instance, the endolymph, if your body movement is to this direction, to the left, that flow will be to the opposite direction, and it pushes the capula, or the cupula over to the right. And it's that information, that stimulation and the information that's sent to the brain. But please make sure that you know the role of the ear in the maintenance of balance. And this is also a possible essay question. It's about the how hearing takes place as well as balancing can be a full essay question. So prepare yourselves for that. Work out or ask your teacher to assist you if you're not very confident in this, but you will also find it in different books. But I think it's well worth it to go and prepare yourself for an essay question.
You never know. Yes. And with that, we have to say goodbye.